Okay, well, in the family Hagaddah, on page 38, with a list of the 10 plagues. A great deal of thought has gone into understanding what the 10 plagues communicate, and there are many, many different pshatim. I want to share with you one perspective, a kind of philosophical perspective, but as I said at the beginning, I don't mean to say this is any more important than many of the other perspectives that people use to understand. I think the plagues break up into two categories. In fact, Maimonides makes this point in the guide, but he doesn't use it exactly the way I use it. Let's go through them and analyze the structure and see how they break up. Dam, blood, the whole of the Nile River turned to blood. Water doesn't turn to blood, period. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened in the whole history of mankind. It is a spectacular anti-natural occurrence. And by the way, just as a point of information, we are told by the oral tradition that all the plagues lasted for a week. And then there were 3 weeks in between. How are we supposed to understand the plague of blood? There's a process of water becoming blood. How long did the process of water becoming blood last? So I can say again? So it's quite clear from the verses that it lasted 1 instant. It only lasted 1 instant. Because the verses say 3 times that the Egyptians couldn't drink the water from the river because of the dead fish that stank and fouled the river. It says it 3 times. It's not because it was blood. Indeed, it says they couldn't take water out of the river because of the stink of the dead fish. It says you couldn't take water out of the river. There must be water there. Just something stopping you from taking the water out. So the process of turning the water to blood was instantaneous, but the effect of the process, which made it impossible to drink the water, was a week long. Very, very few people know this. My oldest son taught me this about 10 years ago, and I resisted it, just as you're resisting it. And if you look in the verses, you can see explicitly that it says that 3 times. Okay. Tzvardeya, the frogs. How did the frogs inundate Egypt? Where did they come from? The verses are clear. They came from the Nile, and perhaps from other waterways as well. That's where frogs breed. Now, what made it a miracle was, number one, the size of the inundation was unprecedented. Number two, it came exactly when Moses signaled that it should come. It disappeared exactly when Moses said it should disappear. So the size and timing is supernatural, but the process that's used is a natural process. It's the supernatural harnessing the natural to produce a miracle. Kinim, lice infestation. That occurs everywhere in the world, and people have ways of dealing with it. And here it was just 100 times as prevalent, as normal. Orov, wild animals, who usually are afraid of human habitation, especially where there's fire. They lost their fear and they terrorized the people. This was not legendary, mythical creatures like pterodactyls. Yeah, I mean that. This was lions and bears, other animals that were prevalent in the forest at the time, and they terrorized the people. Dever, animal sickness. Every year, a certain percentage of your herds die to sickness. This time, they all died. Shchin, boils. Boils are a skin condition. But everybody having boils at the same time doesn't happen. Now, so that's Sfadeya, Kinim, Orov, Dever, and Shchin. There's 5 of them, which are natural processes, supernaturally enhanced so that the event is a miracle, but it's a hybrid because you're using natural processes also. Barad, hail, the oral tradition tells us that the hailstones had fire in them. That's not normal. Hail doesn't fall that way. So that's anti-natural. Arbe, that's locusts, and the Torah says that the locusts were blown in by the wind. That's the way locusts always travel. Oh, you'll tell me they have wings? That's good for about 3 blocks. But to travel miles and miles, they travel on the wind. Here the miracle was that the wind blew in one direction. That's wind being used by HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a supernatural way. The Choshech was 3 days, and it was palpable. It immobilized people. That's not something that happens in the natural world at all. And Magas Bechoros, there's no medical condition known to science which attacks firstborn children. So you have 2 types of plagues here. Some of them, the majority of them, are a supernatural use of a natural process, and some are a spectacularly anti-natural process. Now, I think these 2 different categories of miracles have 2 different types of effect. Imagine that you are an Egyptian polytheist living there with the Jews as slaves, and these miracles take place. How are you going to react? What is your interpretation of the events going to be? Well, let's see. We've been kicking the Jews around for about 90 years with impunity, drowning their newborn babies and enslaving them and punishing them and whipping them. Nothing, not a peep. No response whatsoever. Do the Jews have a God? Probably, because every nation has its own gods. But boy, are they weak and inconsequential. Because we've been beating them up for all this time, and they haven't made a peep. We have the Nile, we have the sun. Pharaoh also is a god. Don't be fooled by those who tell you that under Akhenaten, the Egyptians were monotheistic because they only worshipped the sun. One of the historians points out, no, there were at least 2 because Pharaoh was still a god. He didn't give up on that. So then these miracles take place, and you say, wow, surprise, surprise. The Jewish God does have some power. Why he was sleeping for 90 years, we don't know. But in the meantime, he definitely has some power. And he can intervene and overpower natural processes from time to time. That's what you would see from the 4 that are anti-naturalistic. Turns the river to blood. The Nile River is a god. And the Jewish God turns it to blood. Once. Just once. Never again. He must have snuck up on the Nile when he wasn't looking and took advantage of his ignorance. Didn't dare do it again because the Nile's on his guard. But he got him once. Okay, he did that. And Borod and Choshech. Notice he doesn't repeat any of them, the Jewish God. But we have to give respect to that. The Jewish God, on occasion, can override the processes of nature. So add him into the pantheon of important gods, powerful gods. That much you could give. That's if you have only the miracles that are anti-natural. But now let's take the frogs. If you are an Egyptian polytheist, what are you going to say? Gee, all natural processes are the result of some gods who are in charge. Frogs have been here since as long as we can remember. Who was running frog production up until now? The nymph of the Nile, or whatever category of spirit you believe in. But for this week, for sure, the Jewish God was responsible. For this week, it was definitely the Jewish God's frog production. So, do the gods take turns doing the same thing? As far as I know, in polytheism, you don't have such an idea. There's a sun god, and a god of the wind, and a god of the sea, and a god of war, and a god of peace, and a god of love, and a god of hate. But not 2 gods doing one thing. And if on this occasion you have to agree that frog production was due to the Jewish God, and boils and lice and the behavior of wild animals and the blowing of the wind, begins to look like the Jewish God has his finger on the natural processes also. This would lead to a much more profound and challenging inference that what we call nature is also just the operation of the Jewish God. That's going to attack their polytheism altogether. It's going to uproot it, upend it. They didn't get the message, at least the Egyptians didn't get the message. Some Jews got it and some Jews didn't. There's a reason why 80% died in the 3 days of darkness. But that's the message in this other type of plague. So we have two types of plague with two messages. I think in Jewish history, the message goes on, is articulated in greater detail, greater subtlety later on in Jewish history, where spectacular miracles take place, in particular the miracles of Purim and Hanukkah. I'm not going to do that now. I've done it many times, and it's recorded many times. But this is one thing to know about the lessons of the plagues in Egypt. We're together? Yeah, okay. Now, we did Rabbi Yosef Gli, Rabbi Lezer, and Rabbi Kiva already. So now, skip the next 3 paragraphs with the... Yeah.
Why, it seems like there are 4 unnatural and 6 natural plagues, and why does God have to do 10, like why does he keep going if the point is proven after 1 unnatural and 1 natural plague?
I think the point is that that's not the only thing being taught. This is one thing that's being taught. To go after the Nile is to attack one of the gods of the Egyptians. Go after darkness is to attack the power of the sun, which is another one of the gods of the Egyptians. So there are multiple purposes for the plagues. I'll tell you one thing that the commentators all say: the plagues come in triples. 3 triples plus the one at the end. The triples work like this. The first one, Moses is told, Moses and Aaron, go out to meet Pharaoh early in the morning by the river. That's where Pharaoh went early in the morning. And tell him, you have to let them go, and if not, this is what you're going to get. The second in each triple, they came to Pharaoh in the throne room, in public, and warned him. And the third of each triple has no warning at all. It's just a slap. You resisted. Sometimes he said, I'll let them go, and then changes his mind and doesn't keep his word. So you have these phenomena. These triples, you have 3 triples. Some are on the earth, some are in the heavens, to show that God is in control of what goes on below and what goes on above. So there are lots of lessons that are being taught here.
But just like when I read it down, it seems like they're like not equal as in like there's 6 natural and 4 unnatural, and they're not even like you would think it would be like spaced more evenly. Like,
because they're
unnatural, then like a huge list of natural, and then like...
Yeah, no, I think that there are many other things going on at the same time. And I'm picking out one feature, but it's not the total explanation of all of the text. I didn't intend it to be. Okay, now we say, Kama malos tovos l'moka b'leinu. How many wonderful favors, malos, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us. And now you have the Dayenu song. 15 verses of Dayenu. If this had happened, it would have been enough. If that had happened, it would have been enough. And of course, there are 15 steps in the Seder. There are 15 steps in the courtyard of the temple, going up from the entrance to the Holy of Holies. The 15 is a big, and the 15 Shirei Hamalos in Psalms. And 15 is an important feature. But here, it's very hard to explain this in plain pshat. One of them is really spectacular. If he had brought us close to Sinai and not given us the Torah. What? What? If he had brought us close to Sinai and not give us the Torah, that would have been enough? That's inconceivable. What could that possibly mean? We wouldn't have the Torah? That's the purpose of the whole exercise, to give us the Torah. Give us the Torah and not brought us into the land of Israel? Many mitzvahs only start in the land of Israel. Many mitzvahs are only apply in the land of Israel, agricultural mitzvahs. So this is a good question, and when you're at the Seder, wherever you are, you should ask it and have a good discussion about it. The best answer that I have heard is that each one of these 15 took place miraculously. God could have caused them to take place naturally without a spectacular miracle. And what Dayenu was saying is, even if only this one had been via an open miracle and all the rest had appeared to be natural, we would have had enough reason to celebrate and to give thanks and to give praise, because that would have been enough for us. And all the more so if God actually revealed himself to us 15 times, with 15 different demonstrations. Yeah.
Only 14 Dayenus. Where's 15?
Am I making a mistake?
Could be the first line to come on our left, could be the 15th.
No. You're right. The word Dayenu is said 14 times. But there are 15 steps, because each Dayenu is if he had done A and not done B. Right? So now if you do that 14 times, you're going to end up with an A at the beginning and the 15th at the end. Right? If he had done 1 and not 2, 2 and not 3, 3 and not 4, 4 and not 5, 5 and not 6, if you do that 14 times, the last was going to be if he had done 14 and not 15. So there are 15 things that he did for us. That's what yeah.
So your explanation is most of these are all unnatural, and if so let's say 13 or 14 appeared natural and one was unnatural, that would have been enough for us.
That's right.
I don't quite understand, because even if it's natural, we would still know it came from God. So
yes, but we still know it came from God. That's true, but we respond to open miracles in a way differently from the way we respond to things that happen which have a natural appearance, which we know because of our system of understanding the world comes from God also. For example, there's a statement in the Talmud, a very challenging statement. Ha'omer halal b'chol yom hariz mecharif v'megadif. Someone who says halal every day is cursing God. What? What's that? What's that? I mean, halal is Psalms 113 to 118, through 118. Okay, we add a few extra doublings up of verses, and that's the way we say it. Somebody says those Psalms every day. He's cursing God. What's the connection? I heard from Yeshivat Ohr Somayach in Boston. Halal, regular halal, is said for open miracles. That's one of the reasons why you don't say it on Purim. It wasn't an open miracle in that way. And the Gemara, I think, implies that. So if he says halal every day, it sounds like what he's saying is, you know why we give praise to God and thanks to God, why we worship God? Because he did open miracles. And January 16th, I'm thinking of Pesach, or I'm thinking of Sukkot. But that's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because of those open miracles. And it means that the natural world, he doesn't attribute to God. He only attributes to God interventions in the natural world. That's why he's blaspheming. That's why he's cursing God. Because God is present all the time. But you only say Hallel on the open ones. You don't say Hallel on the ones that aren't open. Right? So our reaction to them is a different reaction. Ramban says, from the open miracles, you learn that everything else that happens is divine providence also. But if you didn't have the open miracles, you wouldn't be able to learn that. Where would you learn it from? If you don't see God's providence sometimes openly, how would you know that it's functioning at all? So the open miracles are very important. So if we have one to give us that beacon of light, that would have been enough. The rest of them we would have attributed to God because of that beacon of light that and now all the more so that we have 15. So now, yeah.
I also heard recently a different shot that like Dayenu for what? Like it would have been enough for what? And he said it would have been enough to thank God if he had only done one individual thing. We still would have thanked him for that thing that God did.
But that's hard to say.
Yeah.
He brought us to Mount Sinai and didn't give us the Torah. Now you got to imagine the Jewish people without the Torah. I say, yeah, but he took us on a nice trip. The scenery next to Sinai is breathtaking, you know. It was one with the sunrise and sunset. We'll never forget that. What would we be thanking for if we didn't have the Torah? In literal pshat, it would be very difficult. Left us in the wilderness forever. Never came into the land of Israel. It's very hard to say. That's why I think people find it hard to deal with because it sounds unreasonable. Okay, so then we summer it all up again, all the Ohr So. We go through all 15 of the levels, and then we add just a few words at the very end. Built us the temple to atone for all our sins. Now, I must tell you, for years, even decades, when I said the Hagaddah, what are sins doing here? This is a happy time. This is a time when God favored us. He took us out of Egypt, out of slavery. He put us on the road to receive the Torah. Do you have to talk about sin, failure, crime, degradation, evil? You know, what's that doing here? Why is it relevant to the theme of the Seder? And I said it every year with a sinking heart. Like, what am I doing here? Till finally I asked my Rabbi Zatzal, and he gave me an instant answer. You're reading it wrong. This is the way to read it. Look at all the things I did for you. I did all these 15 things to you with open miracles. And you rebel against me now? After all of that? I've had it with you. Enough already. Finished. Forget it. I'll get somebody else, like the Christians say. Right? Wouldn't that have been reasonable? Could anybody have complained to God if at this point he had abandoned us? But he doesn't abandon you. After he does all of this for you, he thinks, now maybe they're going to fail. What can I do to protect them from failure? I have to give them something so they can repair the failure. This shows you how deep and consistent God's love for us is. That even if we fail him at the most impossible time, all he's thinking about is, how can we repair the failures? How can we recover ourselves? That's a spectacular expression of God's love. Okay, Rabbi Gamliel used to say, anyone who has not said the following three things on Pesach has not satisfied his obligation, fulfilled his duty. Namely, Pesach Matzah, which, as we will go through them, the paragraphs describe the significance of the three things that we eat. Now, all the commentators agree that when Rabbi Gamliel says you have not fulfilled your duty, he doesn't mean you did zero. He doesn't even mean that if you forgot this and left it out, and you ate all three of them, that you have to go back and eat them again. having said it. No, he doesn't mean that. What he means is you haven't done it in the best way. You haven't completely fulfilled your duty. But even without saying it, the mitzvah is done. The question is, when he says you haven't done it in the best possible way, which of your obligations is it that you have not fulfilled in the best possible way? And here the commentators are split. Some people say that you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of telling the story because telling the story should include the symbolism of the mitzvahs of eating that you have tonight. And others say you haven't done the mitzvah of eating in the best possible way because you're not eating these foods because you spent 2 hours telling the story and you're tired and hungry and it's time to bring on supper. No, you're eating them as a reenactment of what happened to in the first Seder in Egypt, and they knew why they were eating more bitter herbs. They knew that. They knew why they were eating matzah, the bread of poverty. They knew that very well. And they knew why they were eating the Pesach. So if we don't know, we're not reenacting what they did. By the way, I want you to know, I'm saying this also in particular for the recording, I have said for decades that word oni means poor and impoverished. It does not mean affliction. It doesn't mean pain. I said it because I know the grammar and I know what the word means. Well, I'm learning now with a chavrusa of mine, the Maharal on the Hagaddah in Gvuras Hashem, and he says it word for word. Oni means impoverishment, deprivation, being lacking something, and that's all. It doesn't mean any more than that. And that's why Vayaras Dayenu is our affliction, but Oni is poverty. They're two different concepts based on the same vocabulary. He makes that point very stringently in Perek Nun Hey. So I was very, and Nun Daled, I was very, very happy to see that. Okay, so we have to understand the symbolism. Let's take a look. Pesach, that our ancestors ate when the temple was standing. Why? Why did they eat it? This is what I told you yesterday, last study. Because the Kodesh Baruch Hu was poseach on the houses of our ancestors in Egypt. Hashem, asher posach al botei bnei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, b'dagpo es Mitzrayim, es botenu hitzil, v'hikot ha'am v'yishtachlu. Because this is the Pesach sacrifice to Hashem, who was posach on the houses of the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, in Egypt, when he struck Egypt. Now, your translator here is facing a difficulty, which I will explain to you. The literal words are, and our houses he saved. And the people bowed and prostrated themselves. So what does your translator write? He struck the Egyptians and spared our houses. Let's see if you can feel where the translator is having trouble. Because Nogpo means he struck them. And Hitzil means he saved them. So what does that mean? If you're the one who's doing the hitting, no one has to save the ones that you want to be spared, just don't hit them. To save means there's some other danger, there's some external danger, and you interfere with that external danger to make sure that the ones you want to be saved will be saved. How do you put in the same verse, you're hitting and you saved? So your translator doesn't say saved. He says spared. Hitzil does not mean to spare. Hitzil means to save. So I told you in the name of the Ramban, where the verse says that Kodesh Baruch Hu was poseach on our houses and didn't let the destroyer enter. I told you that meant that when Kodesh Baruch Hu came, there was a destroyer with him, independent of him. As the Ramban says, king comes with his retinue, and the people in the retinue do the things for the king, what he wants. They take his instructions. The king doesn't cook himself supper. He has a cook who cooks himself supper. And if they're enemies, king tells the soldiers, Deal with them. King doesn't shoot the arrow, take the sword, and go to battle. So yeah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was striking the Egyptians by having his proxy, his agent, who was killing the Egyptians. That proxy was let loose to kill the Egyptians. When the proxy approached the Jewish house, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took up his position on the Jewish house, the Jewish doorstep, and said to the proxy, not here. That's Bes Botenu Hitzil. He saved our houses from the proxy that was doing the destruction. And when it says, I am not an angel, and I am not a seraph, and I am not an agent, and so forth and so on, what it means is, instead of having them do it and my being absent, I'm personally present to manage the process, but not that he was doing the killing. That's what the Ramban says, and it fits this verse very well. As I say, you can see it from the juxtaposition of Nogpo and Hitzil. Matzazu shanu ochlim al shumma. Why do we eat this matzah? Al shum shall he speak b'tzeikam shall havasei lachmitz ad shenigdal lihem melech velchem lochim hakadosh baruch hu u'golam. This is very tricky. I struggled with this for many years until one of my sons-in-law put me straight about it. Here's what happened. The Jews on the night of the Seder prepared a dough to take food with them. They're going on a journey. What are they going to eat? So they prepared a dough, but it didn't have time to rise. Didn't have time. Until HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the King of Kings, appeared to them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and redeemed them. They were waiting for it to rise. Excuse me, I'm not quite ready yet. My rye bread hasn't risen yet. I haven't baked my rye bread yet. I have to put in sunflower seeds. You know, I have to glaze it with the whites of eggs. Give me time. They were prepared to do that. They didn't have time to do it. As it says, "Vayofu es abatzek asher hotziu miMitzrayim ugos matzos kilo chametz, ki gorshu miMitzrayim, v'lo yochlu lisbamea, v'gam seda lo osu lehem." Okay, now let's read this pasuk. They baked the dough that they took out of Egypt. They baked the dough that they took out of Egypt. Who's they? The Jewish people. When? This is the night of the 16th. This is not describing what happened the night of the 15th. No. They took it out of Egypt. They're already out of Egypt. They're already outside of Egypt. They baked it into matzos, kilo chametz, and not chametz. Why? Because they were thrust out of Egypt. The Egyptians came to them and pushed them out. They weren't in a hurry. The Jews were not in a hurry. Let us have a couple of hours for the oven to bake us bread. We'll wrap it in saran wrap, we'll put it in plastic bags, and we'll take it with us. And we'll have it for tomorrow night. When we come to the first stopover, we'll have it ready to eat. Delicious chametz. But no, that didn't happen. Because the verses say the Egyptians came to the Jews and said, "Get out, we're all dead. If you stay here, we're all dead. They're dropping dead around us." So because they were pushed out, they didn't have time to make it into chametz. They couldn't delay. They wanted to delay. They couldn't delay. And therefore they didn't make provisions for the trip because they were hoping that the bread would be the provisions for the trip. Now, in order to understand this, there are different shittas in Rishonim about this. But the Ran makes it, I think it's easiest to understand. The Ran says, what were the mitzvos that they had when they left Egypt? Well, they had to make a Seder. At the Seder, they had to eat matzah. That's true. How long did the prohibition against eating matzah last when they left Egypt? Answer, 24 hours. Only on the first day was there a prohibition against eating chametz. I said matzah, I said chametz. After that, chametz was permissible, number one. Number two, possessing chametz was mutter right up the whole time. There was no mitzvah about the bar matzah, clean out your house with every crumb. There was no such mitzvah. So their attitude was, okay, tonight it's 15th, for 24 hours we can't eat any chametz, we have to eat matzah, that's the mitzvah. Tomorrow night? What's going to be tomorrow night? Well, tomorrow night we'll eat chametz. Where's the chametz? Where we're going to get the chametz from? We'll make it now. We'll bake it now in Egypt. We'll take it with us. That was the plan. But it didn't work. It didn't work because they were pushed out too quickly to allow them the ability to make chametz. By the way, we learn a very important halacha from here. You probably heard about the 18-minute matzahs. Well, that's dead wrong. It's not 18 minutes for the matzahs. It's 18 minutes for the oven. Matzah takes about 12 minutes. From the time the water hits the flour to the time it comes out of the oven, it's about 12 minutes, right? You say, yeah, but if it takes longer, it all becomes chametz, right? So what's going on with this dough that they took out with them from Egypt and ate 12 hours later? 12 hours? A dough? How come it isn't all chametz? The answer is, if you're working it, the clock stops. If it's in motion, the clock stops. That's the halacha. They were walking. They were going. It was bouncing on their shoulders. That's why it remained matzah. When they finally got to the first stopover place, they're not going to wait now 3 hours to have it rise in the oven. They're hungry. So just as they did when they were slaves, when they slapped it on the wall of the oven and took it down 4 minutes later when it was baked, they did that the first time when they were outside of Egypt as well. Which then means that matzah has not only an allusion to slavery, because the first thing they ate when they were free was matzah. Matzah is both slavery and freedom. We should talk about that. But that's not the point of the paragraph. This is where I got stuck all the years. It's asking, why did we eat the matzah on the night of the 15th, before we left? So I said to myself, this paragraph is talking about the matzah that they ate on the night of the 16th, after they left. How can that be the reason why we're eating it now on the 15th? So my son-in-law said, look more carefully and you'll see that the reason we're eating the matzah is just to emphasize the speed with which we left. That's all. We were pushed out so quickly that we didn't have time to allow the dough that we were making on the night of the 15th to become chametz. And we took it out, and that's why on the night of the 16th it was still matzah, because we were pushed out too quickly. But what we're celebrating here is the speed with which we left. We left quick. It wasn't a long, drawn-out process. There were no one holding us back on the way. There were no barriers, no resistance. That's why we're eating the matzah on the night of the 15th. Now, matzah and chametz are a big deal. Someone who eats chametz on Pesach gets kores. Wow. Kores is the next to most serious punishment for any crime. You understand why kores would be applied to murder and certain types of certain idol worship and other things like that. Eating a roll on Pesach, hard to picture what the big deal is. There is a philosophical idea in chametz. First of all, the Gaon of Vilna said that the shapes of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet carry significance, even significance for halacha. This is very interesting, not obvious at all. But take the word sukkah, spelled samach chaf hey. What shapes do you have possible for a kosher sukkah? Well, it can have 4 walls, like the samach. It can have 3 walls, like the chaf. Or it can have 2 walls and a spitz, like The hay. The letters of the word sukkah give you the three shapes for a kosher sukkah. If you consider chametz and matzah, said the Gaon of Vilna, the letters mem tzadi are in common to both words. The difference is that matzah has a hay at the end, and chametz has a ches at the beginning. So the difference is the difference between a hay and a ches. Now picture them pictorially. Imagine the hay. The hay is a hinge and a spitz over at the end of where the other hinge ends, right? Take the spitz and grow it, expand it, let it rise. If you take the spitz and let it rise, then it connects to the roof and you get a ches. The hay grows into a ches if the spitz expands and rises. What does chametz do? Chametz rises, right? That's what you want from the dough. That's what happens in the oven. It rises up. So the picture you get now is that matzah is frustrated chametz. The dough wants to rise. There is natural yeast and flour. And if you leave it, it will rise. We add yeast and sourdough and all the rest because we want to accelerate and increase the process. But it will rise naturally. So the picture here in terms of halacha is this. There are certain grains which, if you make bread out of them, it's matzah. You can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah by eating the cracker, so to speak, made out of those grains. And there are certain grains which, if they ferment and rise, are chametz. It's the same grains, identically. That means matzah is just frustrated chametz. Chametz has been prevented from rising. That's how you define what matzah is. You can see that in the relationship between the hay and the ches. I don't know about you, but I think that's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. And it shows you there's a whole new dimension. There's a whole new dimension. And of course, in the Kabbalistic works, the structure of the letters is a big subject of analysis. And if you don't know, you need to know. Maybe it sounds a little jarring on your ears. Kabbalah, Kabbalism. Isn't that the Hasidim who do that? Wasn't the Gaon of Vilna against the Hasidim? So maybe associating Kabbalah with the Gaon of Vilna isn't really appropriate. According to many, the Gaon of Vilna was the greatest Kabbalist of his age. He wrote voluminous, fundamental works on Kabbalah, which are studied to this day. So, on the contrary, he himself was one of the foremost proponents of Kabbalah. It's not surprising that he had such an idea. So now, what do we learn from this? I think one philosophical offshoot of these ideas is this. Let's imagine a person who never has seen bread, and doesn't know what bread is. And you hand him a loaf of bread. When he takes it from your hands, what surprise is he going to have in the experience? It's very light. For the size of the package, it's very light. Because as you know, normal bread is 50% air. You take a piece of bread, you can squeeze it down. When you're squeezing it down, you're just squeezing out the air. What you end up with is much smaller. Certainly if it's as completely worthless white bread, then 80% of it is air. That's very light. In matzah, what you see is what you get. There's no hidden expansiveness which is non-substantial. There are things which have large extent, which promise a certain robust reality, which when you analyze them isn't true. One of them is what's called nature. Nature promises a reality that's self-sufficient. Things happen, things are today because of the way things were yesterday. The way things were yesterday caused them to be the way they are today. It carries itself. The Jewish perspective is that there's no such thing as nature. Or, better, what we call nature is just a description of certain types of divine activity. But if you think that it's an independent reality, nothing is independent. Everything exists because God makes it exist. If God didn't make it exist, it wouldn't exist. There's no reality in and of itself. So when you're eating matzah, which is the means of the mitzvah, then you are confronting the reality. If you're eating bread, you're likely to be taken in by the false robustness of the natural world. That's one of the messages of the difference between matzah and chametz. And then if you'll say, I'm quoting the Ramchal now in the Derech Hashem, you'll say, well, if matzah is so holy, so pure, so spiritual, so elevated, and chametz is really so dangerous, why don't we just forbid it all the time? Just eat matzah all the time. The Ramchal says, by the way, people say, Shabbos is so wonderful, how about making 2 Shabbos a week? Make Shabbos on Tuesday also. What would you lose? Ramchal says there's a certain balance. A certain balance. He says, chametz is good for you. Tastes good. It's easily digestible. It can give you health and strength. It's a good part of a normal diet. 1 week out of the year, you have to focus on this spiritual message, all the other spiritual messages that matzah can give us. But there's a balance. Shabbos is holy, it's the foundation of all creation, all the rest of it, 1 day out of 7, not 2 days out of 7. You trust God that He knows the exact balance for making this message work and then implementing it into the time when you have to carry the message with you but not live the message. Okay.